A wealthy couple flying first class to their dream anniversary in paradise looked into the cockpit and decided their pilot wasn't the right kind of person for the job. The scent of entitlement in the Global Wings first-class lounge at JFK was as palpable as the overpriced champagne. It clung to the plush leather chairs and whispered from the hushed, important-sounding conversations. Alexander and Victoria Bennett breathed it in like oxygen. For them, it wasn't a luxury. It was the baseline, the minimum standard for a life they felt they had not just earned, but were owed. Alexander Bennett, a man whose tailored suit cost more than the lounge attendant's monthly salary, scowled at his watch. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift to himself for closing a particularly ruthless real estate deal that had displaced a block of low-income tenants. 10 more minutes, he grumbled to his wife, his voice a low growl of impatience. You'd think for what we pay they could board on our schedule. Victoria, draped in a cream-colored cashmere wrap, didn't look up from her phone. She was scrolling through photos of the private villa in the Bahamas they had booked for their 30th anniversary. Patience, dear, she said, her tone dripping with the exact opposite. Let the herd stampede on first. It's more civilized this way. She flagged down a passing attendant with a flick of her wrist, not even bothering to make eye contact. Another mimosa and go easy on the orange juice this time. The young woman, whose name tag read Alicia, forced a polite smile. Of course, ma'am. As Alicia turned to leave, Victoria leaned toward Alexander, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. They hire just anyone these days, don't they? Her accent is so thick. Alexander grunted in agreement, taking a large swallow of his own drink. The Bennetts operated on a simple, unspoken principle. The world was a hierarchy, and they resided comfortably at its apex. Everyone else was simply staff, a faceless sea of people paid to facilitate their comfort. Their interactions were transactional, their politeness a thin veneer that cracked at the slightest inconvenience. When the boarding call for Flight 327 to Nassau was announced for first-class passengers, they took their time gathering their designer carry-ons with an air of practiced nonchalance. They were the last of the priority group to stroll down the jet bridge, expecting the fawning attention of the cabin crew. Lucia Rodriguez, the lead flight attendant, greeted them at the aircraft door with a warm, professional smile that had been perfected over 15 years of service. Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. We have seats 1A and 1B for you. Can I take your coats? Alexander handed over his jacket without a word, already scanning the cabin with a critical eye. Victoria gave Lucia a cursory up-and-down glance, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly at the sight of the flight attendant's Hispanic-sounding surname on her badge. Just make sure it's hung properly. It's Zegna. Of course, ma'am, Lucia replied, her smile never faltering, though her eyes registered the slight. She had dealt with thousands of Bennetts in her career. They were all variations on a theme. As they settled into their spacious pod-like seats, the pre-departure service began. The champagne was poured actual French champagne, not the cheap Prosecco served to the masses in business class. Warm nuts were presented in a ceramic ramekin. The Bennetts began to relax. This was their world, a carefully curated bubble of privilege soaring 35,000 feet above the common rabble. From his seat, Alexander had a clear view down the aisle and into the cockpit, where the door was propped open for pre-flight checks. He watched as the first officer, a clean-cut young man with sandy hair, went through his checklist. Then another figure moved into view, settling into the captain's seat. It was a black man, tall, broad-shouldered, with flecks of gray at his temples that bespoke experience. He moved with a calm, deliberate authority, his hands gliding over the complex array of instruments with the familiarity of a concert pianist. He wore the 4 stripes of a captain on his epaulettes, the fabric crisp and immaculate. His presence filled the cockpit with an aura of quiet, unshakable confidence. The Bennetts had spent the past hour nursing drinks, inspecting their surroundings with a critical eye, and exchanging whispers about everything from the thickness of the napkins thinner than last year to the demeanor of the staff trying too hard. Each observation was delivered with the absolute certainty of people who believed their opinions were facts. Victoria had already sent back her first glass of champagne, claiming it wasn't properly chilled, while Alexander had insisted on a different blanket after finding an invisible piece of lint on the first one offered. The flight attendants accommodated each request with practiced smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Victoria adjusted her seat, then grimaced. "The leather feels stiff. I told you we should have flown Emirates." "Their new route doesn't start until next month," Alexander reminded her. "Besides, Global Wings knows us. We're Platinum Elite with over 2 million miles." He said this loudly enough for a flight attendant passing by to hear a subtle reminder of their status. The attendant, a young man named Raphael, nodded politely but didn't stop. Alexander frowned. They used to be more attentive. "Everything's slipping." Victoria sighed, reaching for her champagne. Standards just aren't what they were. Around them, other first-class passengers settled in with much less fuss. A silver-haired woman quietly read a book. A middle-aged couple held hands and spoke in soft tones. A well-dressed businessman worked on his laptop. The contrast between their behavior and the Bennetts was stark, though the Bennetts themselves were oblivious to it. The cabin crew moved efficiently around them, preparing for departure. Lucia checked each seat, ensuring all passengers had what they needed. When she approached the Bennetts again, her professional demeanor was firmly in place. "Is everything to your satisfaction now, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett?" she asked. "I suppose it will have to do," Victoria replied, managing to make the words sound like both a concession and an accusation. Lucia nodded and moved on her face, revealing nothing. Years in the industry had taught her how to compartmentalize, how to separate the difficult passengers from the pleasant ones, how to maintain her dignity in the face of casual condescension. In the background, the usual pre-departure announcements began. The safety demonstration video played on the screens, largely ignored by the first-class passengers who had seen it countless times before. Victoria scrolled through her phone until the very last moment when electronic devices had to be stowed while Alexander flipped impatiently through the in-flight magazine. The plane pushed back from the gate on schedule, joining the queue of aircraft waiting for takeoff. The Bennett's world was precisely as they expected it to be, a place where their comfort was paramount, their status acknowledged and their superiority unchallenged. At least it was for now. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he watched the captain. He blinked as if trying to clear a distorted image. He nudged his wife. "Victoria, look." Victoria leaned forward, peering past him toward the cockpit. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, not in shock, but in a pantomime of delicate offense. "Oh my," she whispered, her voice laced with a venomous sweetness. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Alexander snorted a derisive, ugly sound. "Interesting is one word for it," he said, his voice rising just enough to be heard by the passengers in the rows behind them. "Let's hope he knows which button does what." The comment hung in the air, thick and poisonous. A passenger in row 2 shifted uncomfortably. Lucia, who was just returning from the galley, froze for a fraction of a second, her professional mask hardening into a plate of armor. She had heard it, and she knew with a sinking feeling in her stomach that the smooth 9-hour flight to paradise was about to hit a patch of severe man-made turbulence before they even left the ground. First Officer Daniel Ramirez had heard the comment as well. His head snapped up from his pre-flight checklist, his blue eyes flashing with anger. He glanced at his captain, Elijah Montgomery, who was methodically reviewing the flight plan. Captain Montgomery's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw a muscle tighten in his jaw, a subtle tell that he had heard it too. Captain Montgomery held up a hand, a silent command for his co-pilot to remain calm and stay put. He had dealt with this before. Not often, but enough to know that reacting with anger was like pouring fuel on a fire. Professionalism was the only extinguisher that worked. In the cabin, Lucia Rodriguez approached the Bennett's seats, her smile fixed but her eyes cold as steel. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, her tone impeccably polite, yet leaving no room for misinterpretation. Alexander Bennett leaned back in his seat, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying the attention. Problem? No problem at all. Just making an observation. Bit of a diversity hire in the cockpit, it seems. We're just hoping for competence over quotas, that's all. His voice was now loud enough that the entire first-class cabin was silent, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Victoria Bennett sat beside him, a silent, smiling accomplice, her posture radiating a sense of righteous validation. Lucia's training kicked in. De-escalate, inform, set boundaries. Sir, I can assure you that every pilot at this airline is held to the highest and most rigorous standards of training and excellence. You are in the safest possible hands. I'm sure they are. Victoria chimed in, her voice like honey laced with acid. But for a flight of this length over the ocean, one just wants to feel comfortable. We want to know we have the best of the best, not someone who ticked a box, Alexander added. The insult was no longer a dog whistle. It was a blaring air horn. The best of the best was a clear implication that the man in the cockpit, by virtue of his race, could not possibly fit that description. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her book, her expression shifting from surprise to disapproval. 2 rows back, a businessman who had been typing on his laptop stopped and removed his earbuds. The air in the cabin felt suddenly charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel Ramirez, still in the cockpit, gripped his pen so tightly it nearly snapped. His entire body was tense, ready to leap to his captain's defense. But Captain Montgomery remained focused on his instruments, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed any reaction to the words that had just cut through the cabin. Lucia stood her ground, her professional smile still in place, though it had hardened around the edges. She had encountered racism before in her 15 years of flying, but rarely so blatant, so unapologetic. She opened her mouth to respond again, to reinforce the boundaries that the Bennetts had so casually trampled, but before she could speak, she sensed movement behind her. Before Lucia could respond, the subject of their scorn appeared. Captain Elijah Montgomery had unbuckled himself and stepped out of the cockpit. He didn't stride, he didn't swagger. He simply moved into the cabin, his presence commanding immediate respect. He was 6'2", with a bearing that spoke of his years as an Air Force officer before he'd ever touched a commercial airliner. He was the epitome of the calm, authoritative figure you'd want at the controls of a 300-ton machine. He stopped at their row, his gaze level and direct. He addressed Alexander, but his voice was clear and carried through the silent cabin. "Good morning. I'm Captain Elijah Montgomery. I couldn't help but overhear your concerns," he said, his voice a deep, steady baritone. There was no anger in it, only a profound and unnerving calmness. "I am the captain of this aircraft. Is there something specific you'd like to discuss regarding my qualifications?" For the first time, Alexander Bennett seemed to falter. It was one thing to make snide remarks from the comfort of his leather throne. It was another to be confronted by the object of his prejudice, a man who radiated more authority in his simple uniform than Alexander did in his expensive suit. But his pride, a vast and fragile thing, wouldn't let him back down. We pay a lot of money to fly," he stammered, gesturing around the cabin. "We expect the highest standards." "You and I are in agreement on that," Captain Montgomery replied smoothly. "The standard is excellence. It's the only standard this airline has. I have over 22,000 flight hours. I am a decorated veteran of the United States Air Force. I have flown in conditions you could not imagine." He paused for a moment, his gaze steady. "But none of that is truly the point." "Is it Mr. Bennett?" He let the question hang in the air. Alexander's face flushed a deep mottled red. Captain Montgomery continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. My primary responsibility is the safety of every single person on this aircraft. That includes my crew. It includes everyone in the seats behind you. And it includes you and your wife. And my authority in ensuring that safety is absolute. He delivered the words not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Any disruption, any behavior that undermines the crew's ability to perform their duties, or any passenger who creates an intimidating or hostile environment, is a direct threat to that safety. He paused, letting his words sink in. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was the final word on law and order in this metal tube. So we have a choice here, Captain Montgomery stated, his eyes locking onto Alexander's. You can accept that I am your captain and that you will treat my crew and me with the requisite respect for the remainder of this flight to Nassau, or you can deplane right now. There is no third option. The choice is yours. The ultimatum was delivered without malice, a simple statement of fact. It was a line drawn in the sky. Alexander Bennett stared at the captain, his mind reeling. Deplane. Be humiliated in front of the entire cabin. But the alternative to sit here for 9 hours under the command of this man, having been so thoroughly and publicly put in his place, was unthinkable to his ego. He looked at Victoria. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, her eyes burning with fury. They would not be cowed. They were the Bennetts. People didn't give them ultimatums. Fine. Alexander spat, his voice trembling with rage. Fine. We'll get off. We'll get off your plane, and you can be sure the CEO of this airline will hear about this. You'll be flying cargo planes to Anchorage by next week if you're lucky. Captain Montgomery's expression remained unchanged. He simply nodded. As you wish. He turned to Lucia. Ms. Rodriguez, please coordinate with the ground crew to have Mr. and Mrs. Bennett and their carry-on luggage escorted off the aircraft. They have voluntarily chosen to end their travel with us today. With that, he turned and walked back into the cockpit, the door closing behind him with a quiet, decisive click. The confrontation was over. The consequences, however, were just beginning. The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. Every passenger stared at the Bennetts, a mixture of shock, disgust, and a little bit of schadenfreude on their faces. Alexander and Victoria, who had thrived on being the center of attention, were now wilting under its glare. The admiration they craved had curdled into contempt. Lucia Rodriguez's voice was crisp and professional, devoid of any hint of triumph. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, if you'll please gather your things. The ground staff is on its way to assist you. Alexander stood up, yanking his briefcase from the overhead bin with such force that a stray magazine fluttered to the floor. His face was a mask of fury. This is outrageous. We are being thrown off this flight, he boomed, trying to reframe the narrative from one of choice to one of victimhood. Lucia's reply was swift and precise. To be clear, sir, you were given a choice by the captain. You chose to deplane. This is not a removal for cause. This is you voluntarily terminating your journey. The distinction was critical, and Alexander knew it. A removal for cause came with a host of potential legal and financial penalties. Voluntary termination was, he thought, a cleaner exit. He still believed he held the upper hand, that a strongly worded letter from his lawyer would result in a groveling apology and a lifetime supply of first-class travel vouchers. Victoria stood pulling her cashmere wrap tightly around her shoulders as if to ward off the judgment of the other passengers. She refused to meet anyone's eye, instead fixing her gaze on a point on the bulkhead, her expression one of pure, unadulterated venom. A gate agent, a stern-looking man named Thomas Parker, appeared at the door, accompanied by 2 airport security officers. The sight of the uniformed officers sent a fresh wave of humiliation through the Bennetts. Sir Thomas said, his tone all business. Please follow me. As they began their walk of shame down the aisle, a passenger in row 3, a man in a simple polo shirt, started a slow, deliberate clap. Within seconds, a few others joined in creating a scattered, sarcastic round of applause that followed the Bennetts all the way to the aircraft door. It was the soundtrack to their disgrace. Stepping onto the jet bridge felt like crossing into another dimension. The quiet, climate-controlled comfort of the plane was replaced by the cool, indifferent air of the terminal. The hum of the engines they were supposed to be flying with was now a mocking reminder of their folly. As they reached the end of the jet bridge, Alexander turned to Thomas, his voice dripping with condescension. "Now I need you to get our luggage off that plane immediately, and you'll be rebooking us on the next available flight. First class, of course. We'll overlook this gross misconduct if the airline makes it right immediately." Thomas looked at a printout on his clipboard, his face impassive. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, sir. Your checked baggage is in a container in the main hold. To retrieve it would require unloading several tons of other luggage, causing a significant delay to the flight's scheduled departure. As per standard procedure when a passenger voluntarily deplanes at the last minute for non-security reasons, your luggage will continue on to the final destination." Alexander stared at him dumbfounded. "What, you're sending our bags to Nassau without us?" "Yes, sir. It will be held by our baggage services in Nassau. You can arrange for a courier to retrieve it at your own expense, or you can book a flight on another airline to claim it yourself." Victoria let out a horrified gasp. "All my clothes, my shoes, my toiletries are in there?" The thought of being stranded in New York without her meticulously planned resort wardrobe was a fresh and deeply personal horror. "And what about our next flight?" Alexander demanded, his voice rising in panic. Thomas shook his head. "Our airline has no other flights to Nassau today, sir. And due to the nature of the incident, any rebooking will have to be handled by the Corporate Customer Relations Office. They will be open during normal business hours tomorrow." He offered them a slip of paper with a phone number on it. "The gate is now closed. I have to prepare for the next departure." He turned and walked away, leaving the Bennetts standing in the terminal utterly alone. They watched through the large plate glass window as the ground crew pushed Flight 327 back from the gate. The plane they were supposed to be on, the plane that was carrying their anniversary wardrobe, their sunscreen, and their sense of superiority to a sun-drenched island. Alexander's face, which had been red with anger, was now pale with dawning horror. He had made a colossal miscalculation. He had assumed his status and wealth were a universal currency, that the rules that governed ordinary people could be bent or broken for him. He had treated the airline captain like a recalcitrant limo driver, and had been shocked to discover the man held all the power. "Alexander." "What do we do?" Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. The defiant fury was gone, replaced by a nascent fear. "I'll fix this," he snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. He pulled out his phone, ready to unleash his fury on the first customer service agent unlucky enough to answer. "They have no idea who they've just messed with. I'll have jobs for this. I'll have everyone's job." But as he looked at the reflection of their two pathetic figures in the window with the sleek silver aircraft taxiing away in the background, a cold dread began to seep into his bones. He had a sickening feeling that for the first time in his life he wasn't the one in control. He had picked a fight supremely confident in his victory, only to realize he had just been checkmated in the opening move. Their night would be spent not in a 5-star Bahamian villa, but in a sterile, overpriced airport hotel with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a burgeoning sense of doom. As Flight 327 climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, the atmosphere in the cockpit was calm but tense. First Officer Daniel Ramirez was still seething. "I can't believe those people," Daniel said, his hands tight on the controls as he managed their ascent. The nerve, the absolute unmitigated gall. Captain Elijah Montgomery, ever the professional, was focused on his instruments, his voice even. "Attitude is everything, Dan. In life, and especially up here. Keep your eyes on the horizon." Once they were settled into their flight path and the autopilot was engaged. However, the captain leaned back in his seat. He took a slow breath, the mask of pure professionalism softening just a fraction. "You did well to keep quiet," Elijah said. "That was my mess to handle. It shouldn't have been a mess in the first place, Captain." What they said was unacceptable. It was, Elijah agreed, his voice flat. But it happened. Now we follow procedure. He pulled a tablet from its mount. "We need to file a full incident report. Every detail, every word you heard, every action I took, every response from Ms. Rodriguez. It needs to be precise. When we land, this report goes straight to flight operations." For the next 20 minutes, they meticulously recounted the entire affair. Elijah typed, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. He quoted Alexander Bennett's comments about competence over quotas and Victoria Bennett's desire for the best of the best. He detailed his own response, the ultimatum he presented, and the couple's decision to deplane. He added Lucia's report, which she had sent to the cockpit via the onboard messaging system, corroborating every detail and adding her own observations of the couple's behavior from the moment they boarded. "It's important that we are factual and dispassionate," Elijah instructed. "We state what happened, not how we felt about it. The facts will speak for themselves." When the report was finished, it was a damning minute-by-minute account of entitlement and prejudice, clashing with protocol and authority. Elijah reviewed it one last time, added his digital signature, and scheduled it to be transmitted to the airline's central servers the moment their wheels touched down in Nassau. "That's that," he said, stowing the tablet. "Now let's fly this plane." Daniel nodded, still troubled but somewhat soothed by his captain's methodical approach. "You know, Captain, if it had been me they were talking about, I don't think I could have remained so calm." Elijah looked out at the vast blue sky, the endless ocean below. "In this job, calm isn't optional, Dan. It's the difference between life and death. The moment you let emotion take the wheel, you've lost control of the aircraft." "But they insulted you, questioned your abilities because of your race." That's their problem," Elijah interrupted gently. "Not mine. They're stuck in their small, angry world. I refuse to join them there." Daniel considered this, watching his captain's steady hands as they made a minor course adjustment. "Is that what they taught you in the Air Force? This Zen approach?" Elijah smiled slightly. "The Air Force taught me discipline. Life taught me the rest." Then his expression shifted subtly, becoming more pensive. "Truth is, Dan, I haven't always been this calm. There was a time." He trailed off, his eyes focusing on a point far beyond the windscreen. Captain Elijah shook his head slightly. "There was an incident early in my commercial career. A passenger, wealthy businessman, not unlike our friend back there, made some remarks about how he wasn't comfortable with my kind at the controls. I was first officer then. What happened? I lost my cool. Not dramatically, I didn't shout or make a scene, but I responded with anger, with sarcasm. I matched his contempt with my own." Elijah's voice was quiet, reflective. The captain had to step in, smooth things over. Afterward, he told me something I've never forgotten. "They can only diminish you if you let them." Daniel absorbed this in silence, seeing his mentor in a new light. "It still hurts sometimes," Elijah admitted. "The assumptions, the prejudice, the constant need to prove yourself beyond what others have to do. But I learned to channel that hurt into excellence, into being so damn good at my job that no one could question my place in this seat." He tapped a control, making a minor adjustment to their heading. "That's why I train other pilots the way I do. Why I push for perfection. Because in this profession, excellence is the only answer to doubt." Daniel nodded slowly. "Thank you for sharing that, Captain. I didn't know." "Not many do," Elijah said with a slight smile. "Now, how about we run through the checklist for our approach into Nassau? We should be hitting some moderate turbulence in about 20 minutes. Just like that, Captain Montgomery was back in full professional mode. The brief moment of personal disclosure closed as smoothly as a cockpit door. But Daniel had glimpsed something important, the human beneath the uniform, the struggle behind the composure. It changed nothing about how he viewed his captain's abilities. If anything, it deepened his respect for the man. Elijah Montgomery wasn't calm because he was immune to insult or incapable of anger. He was calm because he had learned through painful experience the power of controlling his reactions rather than letting them control him. As they continued their flight over the vast Atlantic, both men focused on their duties with renewed precision, their shared understanding creating a stronger bond of trust in the cockpit. 9 hours later, in a sterile glass-walled office in Dallas, Texas, the incident report pinged into the inbox of Gregory Wilson, the Vice President of Flight Operations for Global Wings Airlines. Wilson was a man who lived by the book. A former pilot himself, he was a staunch defender of his crews, but also a ruthless enforcer of company policy. He was known for his short temper and his even shorter tolerance for nonsense. His morning coffee was still steaming when he opened the email flagged with a red, high-importance alert. The subject line read, "Incident Report, FLT 327, JFK NAS Voluntary Deplaning of PAX. Montgomery." Wilson's eyebrows shot up. An incident involving Elijah Montgomery. That was rare. Montgomery was his rock, the steadiest hand in the entire fleet. He wasn't just a captain. He was the captain. He read the report, his expression growing darker with every sentence. He read the Bennett's slurs, their condescending demands, their arrogant threats. He read Captain Montgomery's calm by-the-book response. He read the witness statements from the first officer and the lead flight attendant. When he was finished, he sat back in his chair, his coffee forgotten. He didn't feel anger. He felt a cold, surgical rage. He picked up his phone and dialed his administrative assistant. "Janet," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get me everything we have on passengers Alexander and Victoria Bennett. Their flight history, their loyalty status, their contact information, any previous complaints filed by or against them. I want it in 5 minutes." He hung up and then pulled up the employee file for Captain Elijah Montgomery. It was a file he knew almost by heart. He scrolled through the commendations, the performance reviews that were always glowing, the long list of achievements. 547 total flight hours. 15 years with Global Wings Airlines. 10 years prior service, United States Air Force, decorated pilot, retired with the rank of Major. 0 safety infractions. 0 formal complaints filed against him in his entire career. And then he got to the most important line item, the one that made the Bennett's behavior not just offensive, but catastrophically stupid. Current position: Captain Boeing 777-787 Fleet and Chief Training. Captain Global Wings Airlines. Gregory Wilson let that sink in. Chief Training Captain. That meant that Elijah Montgomery, the man the Bennetts had accused of being a diversity hire, was the pilot responsible for training and certifying every single other 777 and 787 captain in the entire airline. The best of the best that Victoria Bennett had so desperately wanted. They had all been trained, tested, and personally signed off on by the very man they had rejected. He was the standard bearer. He was the one who decided who was good enough to sit in the left-hand seat. A humorless smile touched Wilson's lips. The Bennetts thought they were complaining about an underqualified pilot. They had no idea they had insulted the Kingmaker. Janet walked in and placed a folder on his desk. The Bennett file. "Mr. Wilson." "Thank you, Janet. Please clear my next hour and get me the head of our corporate legal team on the phone." He opened the file. The Bennetts were Platinum Elite members, their status earned through years of expensive first-class tickets. There were a few prior complaints on their file. A flight delayed by weather, a steak that was slightly overcooked, a lounge that was too crowded, a pattern of minor entitled grievances. But this was different. This was a new league. Gregory Wilson knew exactly what he was going to do. The Bennetts had threatened to get Captain Montgomery fired. Wilson was going to make sure they never set foot on a Global Wings aircraft or any of its partner airlines ever again. They had wanted to speak to the person in charge. They were about to get their wish. Wilson scrolled through the details of the Bennett's loyalty account. 2 million miles accumulated. Over 50 first-class flights in the past 3 years alone. A spending pattern that indicated they used Global Wings almost exclusively for their travel needs. He noted with grim satisfaction that they had 7 more flights booked in the coming months. A Caribbean cruise departure, a trip to London, a weekend in San Francisco. All of those would need to be canceled. He picked up his phone again. Janet, I need you to draft a letter. Formal termination of membership in our loyalty program for Alexander and Victoria Bennett. Cite Policy Violation Section 8.3 Behavior detrimental to the safety and comfort of other passengers or crew. Include the details from Captain Montgomery's report but redact any personal information about the crew. Add that all future reservations will be canceled and no refunds will be issued as per the terms and conditions they agreed to. Then have legal review it before I sign off. Yes, sir, Janet replied. And the head of legal is on line 2 whenever you're ready. Wilson pressed the button for line 2. Bill Greg Wilson here. I've got a situation I need your input on. We've got a couple of Platinum Elite members who verbally abused one of our captains based on his race, refused to acknowledge his authority, then deplaned rather than fly with him. I want to permanently ban them from the airline and revoke all their membership benefits. Tell me what I need to know. He listened to the lawyer's response, nodding occasionally. Yes, we have the full incident report. Yes, multiple witnesses. Yes, they chose to deplane voluntarily after being given a choice. Excellent. That's what I wanted to hear. I'll have the full documentation sent to you within the hour. I want this wrapped up by end of day. As Wilson hung up, his office door opened again. This time it was Margaret Donovan, the airline's director of corporate communications, and a longtime colleague. I heard about the Montgomery incident, she said without preamble. Do we have a PR strategy? This could blow up if they go to the media. Wilson raised an eyebrow. I'm permanently banning 2 Platinum Elite members who spent over $200,000 with us last year, and you're worried about PR. I'm always worried about PR. Margaret replied evenly. And frankly, Greg, I'm not sure a permanent ban is the right move here. These are high-value customers, maybe a suspension. A stern warning. They racially abused our chief training captain, Wilson interrupted, his voice hard. The man who has trained every 777 and 787 pilot in our fleet. This isn't a customer service issue, Margaret. It's a values issue. I understand that, she countered. But we live in a world where these people could spin this to social media claim they're being unfairly targeted. It's a risk. Wilson's jaw tightened. So what's your suggestion? Let it slide because they're rich? Because they might make noise? What message does that send to Montgomery, to our other minority pilots and crew, that abuse is acceptable if you spend enough money with us? Margaret sighed. I'm not saying let it slide. I'm saying be proportionate. Be strategic. This is proportionate, Wilson said firmly. And my strategy is simple. We back our people, especially when they're right. Montgomery handled this perfectly. Now it's our turn to have his back. Margaret studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll prepare a statement in case this goes public. Short, factual, emphasizing that we have zero tolerance for behavior that creates an unsafe environment or undermines crew authority. Good Wilson agreed. And Margaret, this isn't just about Montgomery. This is about what kind of company we want to be. Do we value money more than dignity? Do we bend our standards for wealth and status? Because if we do, we're no better than the Bennetts. After Margaret left, Wilson turned back to his computer and began typing a direct message to Elijah Montgomery, scheduled to be delivered once the captain had completed his post-flight duties. It was brief, but sincere. Elijah, I've reviewed the incident report from today's JFK and AS flight. Your handling of the situation was exemplary and in keeping with the highest standards of Global Wings. The passengers in question will never set foot on one of our aircraft again. Thank you for your continued professionalism and leadership. Greg. He hit send, then picked up his now cold coffee and took a sip, grimacing at the taste. It was going to be a busy day, but a necessary one. Some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences, no matter who you were or how much you paid for your ticket. The Bennetts spent a miserable, sleepless night in a soulless hotel near JFK. Their fury had slowly given way to a gnawing anxiety. They had no clothes, no toiletries, and the hotel gift shop offered little more than tiny t-shirts and travel-sized toothpaste for $8. They ate a joyless room service meal, the cost of which was a bitter pill to swallow after being denied their gourmet first-class dinner. The next morning, Alexander, dressed in his now rumpled Zegna suit, was ready for battle. He had rehearsed his speech, a blistering tirade of indignation and legal threats. He was a Platinum Elite member. He spent tens of thousands of dollars with this airline every year. They would grovel. They would compensate him. He would make them pay. He bypassed the general customer service number and dialed the exclusive Platinum Elite hotline, a number that usually connected him to a concierge-level agent who would cater to his every whim. Global Wings Platinum Services. This is Michelle. How can I help you? My name is Alexander Bennett. He announced, his voice booming with self-importance. I need to be put through to your corporate headquarters immediately. I need to speak to someone in charge, a vice president, the CEO. I am filing a formal complaint against a Captain Elijah Montgomery of Flight 327 yesterday, and I assure you the consequences for your airline will be severe. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the soft clacking of a keyboard. Michelle's tone shifted from cheerful to reserved. One moment, Mr. Bennett. He was placed on hold. The usual soothing jazz music was absent. There was only silence. He waited fuming for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a new voice came on the line. It was male calm and carried an unmistakable weight of authority. Mr. Bennett, this is Gregory Wilson. I'm the Vice President of Flight Operations. I understand you wish to file a complaint. Alexander perked up. This was it. He had gotten straight to the top. That's right, Mr. Wilson, he said, launching into his prepared speech. Your captain, Mr. Montgomery, was unprofessional, aggressive, and ejected my wife and me from his aircraft for absolutely no reason. It was a disgusting abuse of power. We were humiliated. Our anniversary trip is ruined. We demand a full refund, significant compensation for damages, and the immediate termination of this pilot. He finished breathless and triumphant, waiting for the stammered apologies to begin. Instead, there was another silence. Then Wilson spoke, his voice as cold and hard as granite. Mr. Bennett, I have the full incident report on my desk. I have the signed statements from Captain Montgomery, First Officer Ramirez, and Lead Flight Attendant Rodriguez. I also have 2 unsolicited statements from other first-class passengers who emailed us after the flight to commend the crew's professionalism and report your disruptive behavior. Alexander's blood ran cold. That's a lie. They're all covering for each other. Are they? Wilson's voice was laced with ice. Let me be crystal clear about what happened here. You and your wife boarded our aircraft and made loud, derogatory, and racist remarks about the commander of the flight. When you were politely confronted about this, you doubled down. Captain Montgomery, in accordance with federal aviation regulations and company policy regarding passenger interference with a flight crew, gave you a clear and simple choice. You chose to deplane. You were not ejected. This is slander, Alexander shouted. We were just concerned about his experience. His experience. Wilson let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Mr. Bennett, you weren't just concerned. You were insulting. And in your ignorance, you made the single biggest mistake of your traveling lives. Wilson paused for a moment, his voice lowering to a predatory calm that Alexander could feel through the phone. "You see, the man you accused of being a diversity hire is Captain Elijah Montgomery. And Captain Montgomery is not just one of our senior pilots. He is our chief training captain for the entire Boeing 777 and 787 fleet." He paused to let the words detonate. "What does that mean?" Alexander asked, his voice a weak whisper. "It means," Wilson continued, his voice dropping to a predatory calm, "that every single captain who flies those aircraft for this airline, every single one of them was trained by him, certified by him. The best of the best you were so worried about. They don't get to sit in that seat until the man you insulted personally signs off on their competency. He doesn't just meet our standards, he sets our standards. You didn't question a pilot, Mr. Bennett. You questioned the very foundation of this airline's operational excellence." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Alexander felt the room spinning. He put the call on speaker so Victoria could hear. "So, no, Mr. Bennett," Wilson went on, his voice picking up speed. "We will not be terminating Captain Montgomery. We will be giving him a formal commendation for his exemplary handling of an incredibly difficult situation. We will not be refunding your tickets as you breached the contract of carriage by causing a disturbance. We will not be offering you any compensation. In fact, we will be sending you a bill for the minor departure delay you caused." Alexander finally found his voice. "You can't do this." "Oh, I'm just getting started," Wilson interrupted. "As of this moment, you and your wife are permanently banned from flying on Global Wings Airlines for life. Your Platinum Elite status is revoked. Your frequent flyer miles are forfeited. A permanent note has been placed on your file detailing this incident." Wilson delivered his final blow. "And since we share security information with our partner carriers in the SkyTeam Alliance, I can say with a high degree of confidence that you will find it very difficult to book a flight with any major international airline for the foreseeable future. You have been flagged as aggressive, non-compliant, and a potential safety risk." He paused for a moment. "You wanted my attention, Mr. Bennett. You have it. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The line went dead. Alexander stood in the silent hotel room, the phone still pressed to his ear. Victoria had sunk onto the edge of the bed, her face ashen. They hadn't just lost a vacation. They had been surgically and systematically excised from the world of privileged travel they had built their identities around. The gilded cage had vanished, leaving them exposed and powerless. The karma wasn't just hitting back. It was a tidal wave, and it had just swallowed them whole. Victoria's hand trembled as she reached for a glass of water on the bedside table. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice uncharacteristically small. "What just happened?" Alexander couldn't answer. The words stuck in his throat like shards of glass. Their carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement was crumbling around them in real time. The realization that there were consequences, real, tangible consequences for their behavior, was a concept so foreign that neither of them knew how to process it. 2 million miles, Victoria said, her voice hollow. Gone. Just like that. But it wasn't just the miles. It was the status, the prestige, the identity they had built around being elite travelers. The way the flight attendants knew their names, the way the lounge staff recognized them, the way they could board first, sit in the best seats, be treated with deference and respect, or what they had mistaken for respect, which was really just professional courtesy. Alexander slowly sat down on the edge of the bed beside his wife. The anger that had fueled him was draining away, leaving something else in its place. Something that felt uncomfortably like shame. "We'll fight this," he said, but the conviction had left his voice. "I'll call our lawyer. We'll sue them for discrimination, for harassment, for something." Even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. The incident report would be detailed, thorough. There would be multiple witnesses, and the fact that they had chosen to deplane rather than accept Captain Montgomery's authority would be damning in any legal proceeding. Victoria buried her face in her hands. "I just wanted a nice anniversary," she said, her voice muffled. "I just wanted to go to the beach." Alexander didn't respond. He was staring at his reflection in the hotel room mirror across from the bed. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was disheveled. He looked every bit as defeated as he felt. The most terrifying realization was that for the first time in his adult life, his money and status couldn't shield him from the consequences of his actions. The rules he thought didn't apply to him had just been enforced with ruthless efficiency. The bubble of privilege he had lived in had burst, leaving him exposed to a world where his behavior, not his bank account, determined how he was treated. "I need to call the office," he said, reaching for his phone again. "I have meetings tomorrow. I need to let them know I'll be back." But even this simple task seemed insurmountable now. How would he explain what had happened? What would his partners think? What would his clients say if they knew? The Bennett empire, built on arrogance and entitlement, was suddenly standing on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in. Victoria stared at her husband, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. The gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in, replacing her initial shock with a growing dread. "How are we supposed to get home?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How are we supposed to travel anywhere ever again?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. "We'll use another airline, one that's not in their alliance, or we'll fly private." But even as he said it, he realized that flying private would be prohibitively expensive for routine travel, and finding major airlines not somehow connected to Global Wings or its partners would severely limit their options. "And our luggage," Victoria pressed. "What about all my things in Nassau, my jewelry, my dresses?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "We'll hire someone to retrieve it. I'll call some contacts, get it shipped back." But again, the practicalities seemed overwhelming. Who would they call? How would they arrange it from here? Everything that had once been simple, a phone call to a concierge, a word with a manager, was now complicated by their newly minted pariah status. Victoria's eyes welled with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "You and your big mouth. You just had to say something, didn't you? You couldn't just keep your thoughts to yourself for once." "My fault." Alexander's voice rose. "You were right there with me. But for a flight of this length over the ocean, one just wants to feel comfortable." He mimicked her voice cruelly. "Don't pretend you weren't an equal partner in this." They glared at each other. The blame game, the only familiar territory in this new hostile landscape they found themselves in. Their marriage had always functioned best when they had a common enemy. Wait staff, flight attendants, valet parkers, anyone who failed to meet their exacting standards. Now, with no external target, they turned on each other. "We need to get home," Victoria finally said, deflating slightly. "We need to figure out how to fix this." Alexander nodded grimly. He picked up his phone and began searching for flights to New York on airlines not affiliated with Global Wings. The options were limited and expensive, especially for last-minute bookings. Eventually, he found a budget carrier with 2 middle seats in the back of the plane departing in 4 hours. It would cost them nearly as much as their original first-class tickets. "This is the best I can do," he said, showing Victoria the itinerary. "We'll be home late tonight." Victoria looked at the screen and winced. "Middle seats, in economy." "It's that? Or we rent a car and drive for 2 days," Alexander snapped. "Take your pick." She nodded resignedly, and he booked the tickets with a credit card that felt heavier in his hand than it had yesterday. They checked out of the hotel, both still wearing the clothes they had worn on the flight. In the taxi to the airport, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their new reality pressing down on them. The budget airline terminal was a stark contrast to the sleek premium environment they were used to. No priority check-in, no lounge access, no preferential treatment. They stood in line like everyone else submitted to security screening, like everyone else waited at the crowded gate like everyone else. When boarding finally began, they were in one of the last groups called. They shuffled down the narrow aisle of the packed aircraft, searching for their seats, feeling the curious glances of passengers already seated. Two middle-aged people in designer clothes, clearly out of place in this budget setting, squeezing into middle seats separated by the aisle. Victoria closed her eyes as she settled between a large man with a persistent cough and a teenager with headphones blaring music loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Alexander found himself wedged between a mother with a fussy infant and an elderly woman who immediately engaged him in conversation about her grandchildren. As the plane took off, both Bennetts stared straight ahead, enduring the discomfort in silence. This, they realized, was their new normal. The privileges they had taken for granted, the special treatment they had come to expect, the bubble of exclusivity they had lived in, all gone because of one moment of unchecked prejudice. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were experiencing for the first time what it felt like to be treated as less than special, to be judged not by their wealth or status, but by their behavior. It was a harsh lesson delivered at 35,000 feet with no parachute in sight. As Flight 327 began its final descent into Nassau, Benjamin Torres was still mulling over what to do with the video he had captured. The footage was clear, the audio distinct. It was a textbook case of casual racism met with dignified professionalism, all played out in the confines of a first-class cabin. He had originally filmed it as a reflex, a documentarian's instinct to capture reality as it unfolded. But now, as the plane's wheels touched down on Bahamian soil, he felt a responsibility weighing on him. Should he post it? Would that be a public service, or just adding to the toxic outrage culture of social media? Benjamin was a tech entrepreneur, the founder of a successful data analytics startup. At 34, he had already built and sold 2 companies, earning him a comfortable fortune and a significant following in the tech community. His social media presence was substantial, with over 200,000 followers on Twitter and a popular tech and ethics blog. But this decision felt different from his usual posts about industry trends or coding challenges. This was about exposing real people, however deserving they might be of criticism. It was about the line between accountability and public shaming, between justice and vengeance. As he waited for his luggage at the carousel, Benjamin thought about his father, a taxi driver who had faced decades of subtle and not-so-subtle racism from passengers who assumed his accent meant he was less intelligent, less worthy of respect. How many times had his father come home, shoulders slumped, to recount some humiliating encounter with a passenger who had treated him like a servant rather than a professional? How many times had he wished someone would stand up and say, "This is not acceptable"? After clearing customs and retrieving his luggage, Benjamin settled into a taxi headed for his beachfront hotel. He pulled out his laptop and navigated to the Global Wings customer service page. He found the "How was your flight" survey and opened it. Instead of filling out the standard form, he typed a brief message. "I was a passenger in first class on Flight 327 from JFK to Nassau today. I witnessed a disturbing incident where 2 passengers made racist comments about Captain Montgomery and were subsequently given the choice to respect his authority or deplane. They chose the latter. I have video documentation of the entire exchange, which I've attached. I'm not sharing this publicly at this time, but I wanted to commend the professionalism of your crew, especially Captain Montgomery, in handling a very difficult situation." He attached the video file and hit send, then closed his laptop and gazed out at the turquoise waters of the Bahamas, trying to put the unpleasant incident behind him. What Benjamin didn't know was that his email would be one of the unsolicited statements that Gregory Wilson would mention to Alexander Bennett the next day. What he also didn't know was that a copy of his email, including the video attachment, would find its way to his business partner, Sophia Martinez. Sophia, 29, was the chief marketing officer of their company and a social media expert with a keen understanding of what made content go viral. When she saw the video that evening, her reaction was immediate and visceral. "Ben, people need to see this," she insisted over a video call. "This isn't just about one flight. This is a masterclass in how to handle racism with professionalism. And it's evidence of what people of color face every day, even in so-called elite spaces." Benjamin hesitated. "I don't know, Sophia. I sent it to the airline as feedback. It feels wrong to blast these people publicly, even if they were in the wrong." "Wrong?" Sophia's eyes flashed. "They weren't just wrong, Ben. They were openly racist to a pilot's face, questioning his competence based solely on his race. That's not a difference of opinion or a bad day. That's racism, plain and simple." She paused, her voice softening slightly. "Look, my older brother is a commercial pilot. Do you know how hard he had to work? How many extra hoops he had to jump through just to be taken seriously? How many times he's been mistaken for a baggage handler or a janitor when walking through airports in uniform?" Benjamin was silent, contemplating her words. And that Captain Sophia continued the way he handled it with such dignity, such composure. That's what people need to see. Not just the ugliness, but the strength in the face of it. The professionalism that transcends the provocation. Benjamin sighed, torn between his instinct for privacy and his belief in accountability. "Let me think about it. Maybe we can blur their faces at least." Sophia reluctantly agreed, and they ended the call. But the conversation had planted a seed. As Benjamin sat on his hotel balcony that night, watching the moonlight play on the ocean waves, he found himself returning to the incident, to the calm dignity of Captain Montgomery, to the naked prejudice of the Bennetts. He thought about his father again, about how many indignities he had suffered in silence because there was no recourse, no witness, no validation that what was happening to him was wrong. He thought about his niece just starting college with dreams of becoming an engineer and what kind of world he wanted her to enter. The next morning he called Sophia. "Okay, let's do it. But we blur their faces, not very effectively, but enough to say we tried and we don't name them. This isn't about destroying individuals. It's about highlighting a problem." Sophia agreed, and within an hour she had edited the video, blurring the Bennetts' faces just enough to provide the thinnest veneer of anonymity. She posted it to Twitter with a simple caption, "Privileged couple kicked off flight after racist rant against pilot" was a headline that flew around the globe. News outlets picked it up. The audio was crystal clear. The Bennetts' smug pronouncements and Victoria's venomous whispers were there for the world to hear. In contrast, Captain Montgomery's deep, calm, authoritative voice made him an instant hero. Fly with Montgomery and Captain Montgomery started trending. Back in New York, the Bennetts were blissfully unaware of their newfound infamy as they made a frantic, humiliating trip to a department store to buy basic clothes. It was only when Alexander's phone began buzzing incessantly that he realized something was terribly wrong. Texts from colleagues, missed calls from his boss, an alert from his company's PR department. He found the video online. His blood turned to ice water. Even with the blur, it was unmistakably them. Their voices, their clothes, their sheer unvarnished ugliness were on display for millions. Alexander showed Victoria the video in silence. She watched it, her face draining of color with each passing second. When it ended, she looked up at him, genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. "Everyone will know it's us," she whispered. Everyone. Their world, which had been rocked by the phone call with Gregory Wilson, was now being shattered completely. The private humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. The consequences were no longer confined to their travel arrangements. They were spilling over into every aspect of their lives. And the storm was just beginning. Within hours, the video had been viewed more than 2 million times. News outlets picked it up, embedding it in articles with headlines like "First-class racism couple deplanes," rather than "Fly with black pilot and watch entitled passengers get schooled by hero captain." The comments sections were flooded with outraged support for Captain Montgomery and calls to identify the couple. Hashtags like #FlyWithMontgomery and #CaptainElijah were trending worldwide. Internet sleuths were already working to identify the blurred couple, piecing together clues from the video and cross-referencing with social media profiles. It was a perfect storm of viral content, a clear villain, a dignified hero, a satisfying resolution, and enough moral ambiguity about public shaming to fuel endless debate. The video wasn't just being watched. It was being dissected, analyzed, and used as a teaching moment in discussions about race privilege and professional conduct. As the Bennetts huddled in their hotel room watching their private moment of prejudice become a global sensation, the reality of their situation became crystal clear. There was no walking this back. There was no spinning it. There was no amount of money or influence that could make this go away. The internet had judged them, and the verdict was unanimous, guilty as charged. The professional fallout was immediate and brutal. Alexander Bennett was a partner at a high-profile commercial real estate firm, a company that preached diversity and inclusion in its glossy corporate brochures. A video of one of their senior partners making racist comments was a PR nightmare. He was summoned to an emergency video conference with the firm's managing board. There were no pleasantries. The firm's chairman, a man Alexander had golfed with for years, looked at him with undisguised disgust. "Alexander, we've seen the video," the chairman said, his voice grim. "You have brought disgrace upon this firm. You have violated the core tenets of our code of conduct. Your actions are indefensible." "It was a misunderstanding," Alexander pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. The video was taken out of context. "The context seems perfectly clear." Alexander, another partner, interjected. "You questioned a man's competence based on his race. You are a liability we cannot afford." The board had voted unanimously. They were invoking the morality clause in his partnership agreement. He was to submit his resignation, effective immediately. If he did not, they would terminate him for cause. Either way, his career with this firm was over. Alexander was stunned into silence. Decades of work of backslapping deals and ruthless ambition all incinerated in a 5-minute video clip. He had lost his job, his reputation, and a significant portion of his net worth tied to his partnership. For Victoria, the karma was of a different but no less devastating variety. She was a prominent figure in several high society charity circles, her name a fixture on benefit committees and gala invitations. Her social standing was the bedrock of her existence. The calls started that afternoon, first from the chairwoman of the Children's Hospital Foundation, a woman she considered a close friend. The tone was clipped and cold. "Victoria, in light of the video circulating the board, feels it would be best if you stepped down from your position on the gala committee. We cannot have this kind of publicity associated with our cause." Another call followed. Her invitation to the prestigious Metropolitan Charity Ball, which she had secured through a hefty donation and months of networking, was rescinded. Her membership at their exclusive country club was under review. Friends who had once clamored for her invitations now sent her texts to a chorus of, "I think we need some space." She was a social pariah. The world she had so carefully constructed, a world built on wealth connections and the illusion of class, had slammed its doors in her face. The people she had spent her life trying to impress were now the ones casting her out. As the public reckoning intensified, Captain Elijah Montgomery was experiencing a very different kind of attention. He had returned from Nassau on the scheduled return flight, completed his post-flight duties, and gone home to his wife and 2 teenagers in a comfortable but modest house in the suburbs of Newark, New Jersey. He had seen Gregory Wilson's message thanking him for his professionalism, but he had no idea that the incident had gone viral. It wasn't until his 16-year-old daughter burst into the living room that evening that he realized something was happening. "Dad, you're trending on Twitter," she exclaimed, holding up her phone. "Everyone's talking about what happened on your flight yesterday." Elijah took the phone and scrolled through the feed, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. There was the video. There were the comments, there were the hashtags. His private confrontation had become a public spectacle. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. His wife Diane, a pediatrician, sat beside him on the couch. "You did nothing wrong, Elijah. You handled it exactly right." "I know," he replied. "But this public exposure, it's not what I'm about." His 19-year-old son Marcus joined them from the kitchen. "Dad, people need to see this. They need to see how professionals handle racism. You're a role model." Elijah wasn't convinced. He had always kept a low profile, focusing on his work, his family, and his community involvement. He volunteered as a mentor for underprivileged youth interested in aviation. He served on the board of a local education foundation. He coached Little League baseball in the spring. He did these things quietly, without fanfare or recognition. Now he was being thrust into the spotlight, cast as a hero in a drama he had never wanted to be part of. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Bennetts had accused him of being a diversity hire, someone who got his position because of his race rather than his qualifications. Now his race was once again the central focus, only this time in a narrative of heroism rather than incompetence. Neither characterization captured the full measure of the man. Neither acknowledged the thousands of hours of training, the decades of dedication, the countless small decisions and actions that had built his career. He was being reduced to a symbol, a proxy in a larger cultural battle. As the evening wore on, the calls and messages poured in. Friends, colleagues, former students, all reaching out to express support, admiration, solidarity. Elijah responded to each one graciously but briefly. He wasn't interested in accolades for doing what he considered to be the bare minimum of human decency and professional conduct. When a producer from a national morning show called asking him to appear for an interview, he politely declined. When a journalist from a major newspaper reached out, he responded with a simple statement: "I was just doing my job, following protocol, and treating everyone with the respect they deserve as human beings." There's no story here beyond that. But of course there was a story, and it was being told with or without his participation. In the absence of his voice, others filled in the gaps, projecting onto him their own hopes, beliefs, and agendas. He became a canvas onto which the public painted their ideals of dignity, restraint, and moral courage. Not everyone was a fan, however. The day after the video went viral, Elijah received a call from a colleague, Captain Robert Whitman, a veteran pilot who had been with the airline almost as long as Elijah himself. "You should have just let it go," Montgomery Whitman said without preamble. "Now we've got the whole internet watching us, management walking on eggshells, and crew members filming passengers. It's a mess." Elijah's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "I followed Protocol, Robert. They were undermining crew authority and creating a hostile environment." "Come on," Whitman scoffed. "You've heard worse. We all have. You could have laughed it off, de-escalated without making a federal case out of it. So I should have ignored it. Pretended I didn't hear a passenger questioning my competence based solely on my race. I'm just saying now, we've got a PR situation. The company's under scrutiny. Every passenger interaction is potential viral content. It complicates things." Elijah's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. "What complicates things, Robert, is when we let passengers believe they can disrespect crew members without consequences. What complicates things is when we pretend prejudice is acceptable if it's delivered with a smile and a first-class ticket." After a tense silence, Whitman sighed. "Look, I didn't call to argue. I just think this whole social media circus isn't good for anyone." "Maybe not." Elijah conceded. "But I stand by my actions. I gave them a clear choice. They made it. Everything that happened after that wasn't my doing." After hanging up, Elijah sat for a moment contemplating Whitman's words. There was some truth to his concern about the media circus, but Elijah couldn't reconcile that with the alternative, allowing that behavior to go unchallenged. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Sarah Jackson, a promising first officer he had been mentoring for the past 2 years. She was scheduled for her captain's checkout flight with him next month. "Just watched the video," her message read. "I've spent my entire career trying to be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as professional just to be taken seriously. Seeing you handle that situation, it matters. Thank you." That simple message cut through all the noise of the viral storm, reminding Elijah of what really mattered, not the public accolades or criticism, but the example he set for the next generation of pilots, especially those who didn't fit the traditional mold. For the Bennetts, the public reckoning was a relentless multi-front assault on everything they had built. Their names were fully identified within 24 hours of the video going viral. Their social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Their phone numbers and email addresses were leaked, leading to a barrage of messages ranging from disappointed to threatening. Their children, 2 adult sons, both working in finance, called them horrified by the video and the fallout. Their elderly parents called confused and hurt. Distant acquaintances distanced themselves publicly, making sure their social media followers knew they did not condone such behavior. It was a modern form of public shaming amplified by technology to a scale that would have been unimaginable even a decade earlier. Every aspect of their lives was being scrutinized, every past action re-examined through the lens of this new revelation. Old photos were dug up showing them at charity events with black celebrities, now reinterpreted as evidence of tokenism rather than inclusion. Past business dealings were revisited with people coming forward to share stories of Alexander's cutthroat tactics and disregard for communities of color. Victoria's charity work, once praised, was now dismissed as performative philanthropy, a way to launder her reputation rather than a genuine commitment to causes. The narrative was being rewritten, and the Bennetts had lost all control over it. As they huddled in their apartment blinds drawn against the world, they began to realize the full extent of the damage. This wasn't just a temporary scandal that would blow over. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a well-crafted apology or a strategic donation. This was a fundamental shift in how they were perceived and received by the world. They had been exposed not just for a moment of racism, but for a lifetime of entitlement of treating others as beneath them, of building their sense of worth on the shaky foundation of status and materialism. And now, as that foundation crumbled, they were left to face a terrifying question. Who were they without their privilege? 1 year later, May 2024. Alexander Bennett leaned against the railing of the small deck behind their Connecticut home, watching the spring rain create patterns on the surface of their modest backyard pond. The property was nothing like the sprawling estates or luxury penthouses he had once taken for granted, but over the past year he had come to appreciate its simple comforts. Inside, Victoria was preparing dinner. The sound of chopping vegetables drifted through the open kitchen window, another change in their lives. They no longer relied on private chefs or restaurant deliveries. Victoria had discovered, somewhat to her surprise, that she enjoyed cooking. It gave her a sense of accomplishment of creating something tangible and necessary. Alexander had taken up gardening with similar enthusiasm, finding satisfaction in the direct relationship between effort and result. Their financial situation had stabilized at a level that would still seem comfortable to most Americans, but represented a dramatic step down from their former wealth. Alexander's position at the property management company had evolved into a more substantial role. His experience and knowledge were valuable, even if his reputation remained tarnished. Victoria had started a small online business selling handcrafted home goods, channeling her former interior design expertise into a more accessible form. But the most profound changes weren't material. They were internal, invisible shifts in perspective that had altered how they saw themselves and the world around them. Alexander no longer defined his worth by the size of his deals or the exclusivity of his social circle. Victoria had discovered genuine connections with people she would once have dismissed as unimportant. Their relationship with their sons remained complicated. James, the older one, maintained a formal, distant relationship, still protective of his own career and reputation. Nathan, however, had gradually reopened a channel of communication, bringing his partner, a community organizer named David, to family dinners, where conversations often turned to issues of social justice and equality that would have been dismissed or ignored in their previous life. The viral infamy of the racist first-class couple had faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer scandals and outrages. Occasionally, someone would make the connection, resulting in awkward encounters at grocery stores or local restaurants. But for the most part, they had been granted the anonymity that comes with being ordinary people living ordinary lives. Alexander finished his coffee and went back inside, where Victoria was stirring a pot of soup. Nathan called, she said, without looking up. "They'll be here around 6. David's bringing his niece this time." Victoria turned to face him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "He asked if we'd be willing to come to an event next month. David's organization is hosting a fundraiser for their youth aviation program. Apparently, they take kids from underserved communities to the airport, let them use flight simulators, meet pilots." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Did he say why he wants us there?" "He says it's important to him. That we see this part of his life." Victoria hesitated. "I think he's testing us in a way, seeing if we've really changed or if we're just going through the motions." "And have we?" Alexander asked softly. "Changed, I mean." Victoria considered the question seriously. "I think we're changing. I don't think it's something that happens all at once. It's more turning a ship. Slow, difficult, but once it starts, the momentum builds." Alexander nodded slowly. "I'd like to go. To Nathan's event. Even knowing we might be recognized. That there might be uncomfortable moments. Especially because of that," he replied. "Running away from discomfort is what got us here in the first place. Maybe facing it is how we find our way forward." Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll tell him we'll be there." Later that evening, as they sat around the dining table with Nathan and David's 9-year-old niece Zoe, the conversation turned to the aviation program. "The kids absolutely love it," David was saying, his enthusiasm evident. "For most of them, it's their first time seeing the inside of a cockpit, even in a simulator. But it's more than just exposure. It's about showing them that these careers are possible for them, that the sky isn't reserved for certain types of people." Alexander, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "How can we help beyond just attending the fundraiser, I mean?" Nathan looked surprised. "You want to get involved?" "If that's appropriate," Alexander said carefully. "If our presence wouldn't be counterproductive." David exchanged a glance with Nathan, then turned back to Alexander. "Actually, we're always looking for volunteers with business experience. Someone who could help the older students with professional skills resume writing interview techniques. Things that might not seem important but can be major barriers for kids without connections." "I could do that," Alexander said, a note of genuine interest in his voice. "I'd like to, if you'll have me." The conversation moved on, but something had shifted in the room, a tentative bridge being built across the chasm that had opened between father and son. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that growth was possible, that people could learn from their mistakes if they were willing to face them honestly. As they cleared the dishes later, Zoe asked innocently, "Mr. Bennett, have you ever been on a plane?" Alexander hesitated, then smiled. "Many times. But I think I'm only now learning how to really see the world from up there." The answer made no sense to Zoe, but Nathan caught his father's eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, recognition of a truth that was finally being understood, not just acknowledged. For the Bennetts, the consequences of their actions had been fully realized, not just in the material losses and social exile, but in the painful necessary journey toward authentic self-awareness. They were not the same people who had boarded that flight to Nassau a year ago. They could never go back to who they had been, and for perhaps the first time they didn't want to. July 2024. The auditorium of the Bessie Coleman Aviation Academy was filled to capacity, the excited murmur of voices creating a backdrop of anticipation. On stage, a podium flanked by the flags of the United States and the Academy stood ready for the ceremony to begin. In the front row, Elijah Montgomery sat beside his wife Diane, their 2 children, and Sarah Jackson, who had flown in specially for this occasion. Behind them were rows of young aviation students, their faces reflecting the diversity of the communities they came from: Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, a mosaic of backgrounds, united by a common passion for flight. The Academy was Elijah's vision brought to life. After the viral incident with the Bennetts had thrust him into the spotlight, he had leveraged that unexpected platform not for personal gain or celebrity, but to create something lasting and meaningful. Using the connections and goodwill that had come his way, he had established a foundation dedicated to increasing diversity in aviation with the Academy as its flagship initiative. Located in Newark, New Jersey, in a renovated industrial building not far from where Elijah had grown up, the Academy offered training, mentorship, and scholarship opportunities to young people from underrepresented communities. It wasn't just about creating pilots, though that was a core mission. It was about opening doors to the entire aviation industry: mechanics, air traffic controllers, flight attendants, engineers, all the roles that kept the complex ecosystem of air travel functioning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our founder and president, Captain Elijah Montgomery, announced the MC, and the room erupted in applause. Elijah walked to the podium with the same measured confidence he brought to the cockpit, his uniform crisp and authoritative. But today, instead of commanding an aircraft, he was here to celebrate the Academy's first graduating class. 20 students who had completed the intensive year-long program and were now poised to enter professional aviation training or university aerospace programs. Thank you all for being here today. He began, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the room without need for amplification. This is a proud moment, not just for me or for these exceptional graduates, but for the future of aviation itself. He spoke briefly about the Academy's mission, about the importance of diversity, not just as a social good, but as a practical advantage in an industry that required multiple perspectives and approaches to problem solving. He thanked the corporate sponsors, the volunteer instructors, the families who had supported the students through their rigorous training. Then he turned his attention to the graduates themselves, seated in a special section to his right, their faces shining with pride and anticipation. "When I look at you," he said, "I see the future of flight. I see minds that will innovate, hands that will build, eyes that will spot solutions others might miss. I see determination that will carry you through challenges and character that will guide you when technical skill alone is not enough." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the young faces. "Aviation has given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined growing up not far from where we stand today. It has taken me around the world, introduced me to extraordinary people, allowed me to mentor the next generation of pilots like Captain Sarah Jackson, who is with us today." He gestured to Sarah, who nodded in acknowledgement as a ripple of applause went through the audience. "But the greatest gift flight has given me is perspective. From 40,000 feet, you see the world differently. Borders become less defined. Human divisions seem smaller, less significant. The common humanity we share becomes more evident than the differences we construct." His voice grew more passionate, though it remained controlled and measured. "That perspective is what I hope you carry with you, whether you're in the cockpit, the control tower, the maintenance hangar, or the boardroom. The ability to see beyond artificial barriers, to recognize excellence wherever it appears, to judge people by the quality of their work and the content of their character rather than by surface characteristics or preconceptions." Elijah then introduced a special announcement: the establishment of the Sarah Jackson Scholarship, which would provide full funding for one student each year to complete their commercial pilot training. Sarah, who had not been told about this beforehand, was visibly moved as she joined Elijah on stage to present the first recipient with the award. After the ceremony, as the graduates and their families mingled at the reception, Elijah found himself approached by a familiar face, Nathan Bennett alongside his partner David, and a group of teenagers wearing T-shirts from their community center's aviation program. Captain Montgomery Nathan said, extending his hand, "I'm not sure if you remember me. We met at the National Aviation Education Conference last month. I'm with the Urban Flight Program in Connecticut." "Of course I remember," Elijah replied, shaking his hand warmly. "You're doing excellent work there." "How can I help you today, Nathan?" gestured to the teenagers behind him. "These are some of our students. They wanted to tour the academy, maybe learn about the application process for next year." As Elijah began explaining the program to the eager young faces, he noticed two older figures standing awkwardly at the periphery of the group. It took him a moment to place them out of context, but then recognition dawned. Alexander and Victoria Bennett, looking older and somehow smaller than they had on that flight, were watching the interaction with a mixture of discomfort and determination. Nathan followed his gaze. "My parents," he explained quietly. They're trying to do better. They volunteer with our program now." Elijah nodded, taking this information in stride. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow," he said simply. He turned his attention back to the teenagers answering their questions about flight simulators and training requirements. But as the group eventually moved away to tour the facilities, Elijah made a point of nodding politely to the Bennetts, not in forgiveness or friendship, but in acknowledgement of their presence, their effort, their humanity. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone watching. But in it was contained the essence of what Elijah had been teaching all along, that even at 40,000 feet with the world spread out below like a map, it was the small human connections, the moments of recognition and respect that truly mattered. Later that evening, after the celebrations had concluded and the building had quieted, Elijah walked through the Academy's simulator room alone. The sophisticated equipment represented a significant investment, a tangible expression of faith in these young people's potential. But the real investment was in the intangible in confidence, opportunity, mentorship, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. Sarah found him there, standing in contemplation before one of the simulators. "Quite a day," she said, coming to stand beside him. The scholarship was a surprise. Elijah smiled. "A good one, I hope." "The best," she assured him, "though I'm not sure I deserve to have it named after me. I haven't accomplished enough yet." "It's not about what you've done," Elijah explained. "It's about what you represent, determination, excellence, breaking barriers. That's what these students need to see." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, mentor and mentee now colleagues and friends. "I saw the Bennetts," Sarah said finally. "That must have been strange." Elijah considered this. Life has a way of bringing things full circle sometimes. I don't know their journey, but if they're supporting their son's work, trying to make amends in some small way, who am I to stand in the way of that growth? Sarah nodded slowly. "You really meant it, didn't you? About not letting someone else's poison become your own." Every word Elijah confirmed. "Hate and resentment are burdens I have no interest in carrying. My focus is here on this work, on these students, on the future they'll build." As they left the building together, stepping into the warm summer evening, Elijah looked up at the clear sky above Newark. The stars were visible despite the city lights, a reminder of the vastness waiting to be explored, the perspective available to those willing to rise above the limitations of earthbound thinking. Elijah Montgomery's legacy would not be defined by a viral video or a single confrontation with prejudice. It would be measured in the careers launched, the perspectives expanded, the standards upheld, and the example set for generations of aviators yet to come. It would be written in the sky by those he had taught to fly with competence, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. And that he knew was a legacy worth building one flight at a time. The story of the Bennetts and Captain Montgomery reminds us that character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of challenge. When faced with prejudice, Montgomery chose dignity over anger, professionalism over retaliation. When their entitlement was challenged, the Bennetts initially chose arrogance over respect, but eventually found a path toward redemption through humility and genuine change. True worth comes not from status or wealth, but from integrity, competence, and how we treat others, especially those different from ourselves. From 40,000 feet, human divisions fade away, revealing the beauty of our shared humanity. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of dignity, justice, and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that our character, not our circumstances, defines who we truly are. And remember, sometimes the greatest view comes not from looking down from a position of privilege, but from looking up toward a higher standard of human excellence. Alexander nodded, hanging his jacket on a hook by the door. Another small domestic gesture that would have been unthinkable in their staff-managed Manhattan apartment. "I'll set the table in a bit,"